modesty as well operator. So, hello everybody. For those who don't know me, my name is Mike. I'm with VanDyk Mortgage. Been here with the KW office for 9 years now. I was at my 9-year anniversary. But I wanted to put together a class on roofing and kind of like periodically bring in vendor partners and stuff like that, so they can explain a little bit more from their side, as well as kind of give you some visibility to outside vendors and local vendors in our area, in case you guys ever need contacts at a high level. So I really wanted to do a roofing class because I've been getting a lot of questions lately on a multitude of different topics. So today, I'll start off and I'm going to talk a little bit about the financing stuff that we need to know in regards to roofing. The most commonly asked questions that I'm getting on that type of stuff or situations and issues that I'm seeing. Then we'll transition and we'll let Edward Demas over at Magnum Roofing and Restoration. We'll talk about, more of the construction side from what he's seen, the different things that you may need to know about what's currently going on in the market, as well as the construction side, different products that are out there, different funds. I mean, you'll handle your side of whatever you need. If you guys have questions, we'll have a little Q&A at the end. And then obviously, round things off, we'll have Lindsey O'Donnell to talk about everything in regards to the insurance side for roofing. So I guess to start off with financing, I've made a couple of notes here over the past few weeks. So the most important thing you need to understand when it comes to financing a property is that there's 4 main things any financial institution is looking for. Okay, and those are obviously that we need clear title. We have to have the appraised value. If we don't have the appraised value, we need a clause or some sort of negotiations of what we're doing to keep the deal alive. But here's the biggest one. When it comes to property condition, we don't care about the inspection report. Okay? You don't technically need to forward us the inspection report. That should be more of an insurance-related item that we're going to need on that end. All we care about is what the appraisal report looks like. We have an appraisal report that's as-is appraisal, no subject to repairs. We're good on that side. That takes me to my final point, which is the property has to be insurable. Okay? You can't get any financing on a property. It's not going to be insurable. So when it comes to roofing issues, repair-related issues, sinkhole remediation, all the big stuff that can cause issues in that regard, it has to be insurable for us. Okay? So roofing is something that's kind of been brought up a lot. Now, from what I see on my side, the biggest disparities and discrepancies from what I'm hearing about is, realistic, and this is something you'll have to talk about, realistic lives of roofs versus what the insurance is going to recognize as the realistic life that remains on the roof. Okay? Property could still be perfect. It could still have, a good 5, 6, 7 years, but depending on when that roof went off from an insurance level, that's going to be a big point. That's going to ultimately determine, if a roofing replacement is called for. Now, for financing purposes, the only person that's really going to have some sort of interference on the loan transaction with us is going to be the appraiser. He's going to be looking for things like lifting and curbing, shingles on the end. Is there a lot of evidence of, I don't know what the material is, but the granulars running off the roof, and you can usually see evidence of that from staining on the fascias and the soffits that's usually underhang on the roof. Soffit and soffit vent damage is probably the most common thing that I see, especially, on your earlier dated homes, depending on the construction. A lot of homes now, depending on what communities you're buying in, they're moving back to Spanish tiles. That's more of a Florida thing that we see down here. But, on the traditional construction of roofing, the soffit and that underhang with the soffit vents is probably the biggest identifier of repairs that is called for from our end. Whether it's like wood rot, decay there's damage to the vents are missing, the wire mesh where the soffit vent would be, that's usually one of the most called upon repair items that you can kind of see. Yeah. I mean, and it's also going to be program to program. It's going to be program to program, Conventional, I'm not really going to care too much about it, but from an FHA perspective, it's like every single time. Now, it very well could, but again, for our purposes, we either don't see it or we really don't care about the inspection, only based off of what's subject to for any new agents in here, that's probably one of the, other than the value on an appraisal report, that's where your eyes should go to best anytime you get served an appraisal, is right down low. You need to find out if it's, sales cost based or what they're using to appraise the value of the home at. But right below that, there are 3 check boxes on every single appraisal report. There it is. As is, subject to, and there's 2 check boxes for subject to. Right? If a subject to box is checked, you either need to be looking for an external addendum or attachment from the appraiser that's writing out the verbiage of what's needing to be repaired, or what the terms and conditions are if repairs are already underway. Okay, and more than likely a final inspection is need to be able to go out there. Now, the other thing that we constantly have to keep in mind when it comes to roofing from the finance side of things, a big one is going to be with your attached living style homes. Okay, condos and townhouses mainly, but mainly condos. Really dialing in and getting an understanding from a listing agent or seller's agent of what the HOA is going to include. Okay, some communities for condos, exterior building maintenance and a master insurance policy with the exterior of the building for some condo communities means the roof is going to be covered in those associations. And again, Lindsey's going to be here to talk about all the insurance stuff, but that's going to obviously mean in those situations, we're not going to need an HO3 policy. We're going to need an HO6 policy for financing. So it's going to keep our costs lower from the transaction end. But probably the biggest question that I get is obviously, how are we handling roof repairs and replacements when it comes to financing? Financing is very tricky these days. Prices are going up, interest rates are going up. People aren't going to have as much disposable cash because they're coming 20 grand over appraised value and a covering gap. They're utilizing a lot more capital than they typically have been in years prior. So when roof repairs come up, there's a few things from the finance side that we are really doing, and it's largely going to be up to what the situation is looking like for both the buyers and sellers. That for roof repairs identified that a roof replacement, roof repair, any sort of item that's going to cost a decent amount of money. There's 2 main things that I've seen on the finance side for how those are getting handled. First, obviously, it's going to be what's known as escrow pullback. Now, a lot of seasoned realtors in here have heard of that term before, but an escrow pullback program is basically repairs that are going to be made to a property following the transaction. What's ultimately going to end up happening is escrow money is going to be held with title for those subject to repairs, and they're going to have a period of time following the closing date to get those repairs done and completed by. The contributions going into escrow will come from either the buyer or the seller or a mixture of both. And there's going to be a few other details that are going to need to be provided and to the lender ahead of that closing date in order for the escrow pullback program to exist. The first is going to be you're going to need a couple of bids for what the repair work is going to cost. Okay, and usually what they're going to do is they're going to keep a certain reserve amount above and beyond what that quote is going to be in reserve. So I think the rule of thumb off the top of my head is about 50% reserve. So the roof replacement is going to be $10,000. They're going to keep $15,000 in escrow to obviously release the excess funds after the replacement is done, and that'll go to the appropriate party. So that's the first type of kind of thing that we're seeing with repairs. The other one is going to be, I don't know if your company does this or not, but I have heard of some companies doing this, is when it comes to roof replacement, some roofing companies will go ahead if they know a replacement is needed in order for financing to go through and the property to close. If we can provide a loan commitment letter to a roofing company, they'll sometimes put that roof up towards the tail end of the transaction leading up to the closing date. And it'll obviously be escrowed out of whatever the proceeds are going to go to the seller side. And they'll pay this out to get the roof put on before closing actually takes place. That doesn't happen in every situation. I've seen that a handful of times, but some companies are out there that do things in that manner. With loan commitment letters identifying that everything's in good shape from the lending institution, loan's going to close, no problem. So go ahead and take care of that. Obviously, there's other alternatives when it comes to roofing. There's financing that you can get directly as an installment style loan. Take care of any roof replacement. So if you have any sellers or buyers that don't have the money for that, they should certainly go ahead that, I'm going to turn everything over to Edward. Edward, again, is with Magnum Roofing and Restoration. He's got PowerPoint. He's going to hammer a lot more down on what he sees from his side of things. So if you guys have any questions for him, please speak up, and we'll go from there. Thank you. All right. Thank you, doing. Yeah, I'm Edward with Magnum Restoration. We are a further contractor here. We're located in East Texas, where we service everywhere from pretty much Naples up to the small federal office out there. Currently, I see a bunch of guys out where we are. Specialized residential roofing. We do some repairs, but we're not. I would say that is our bread and butter. Roof replacement, something all day today. Storm restoration. Customers have storm-related damage, and I didn't know that as well. What I'm going to go with you today is a couple different types of roof systems we're going to come across. Very often, we look for from the ground, we see a lot of this stuff. The most common you're going to see is your asphalt shingle. If it looks like bricks on a roof, go dimension to them. That's going to be your builder grade. The most economical, but it's also a rating out of all of them. As far as pricing goes, and it is the cheapest, but because the national one got a lot more competitive, it's a small amount, but technically our company will install them. Less mandatory by HOA or more. Now, you'll see some pricing on here. They're dealing with a roofer. We like to knock off the last 2 years. So, if you ever hit a roof that says 30 square, 2,000 square feet. There's no easy way for you guys to try to guess the price. It's pretty difficult, just because it's steepness, it's overhang patios, front doors, front awnings over the house, garages, you name it, where it's going to start changing dramatically. So when people are like, oh, I've got a 1,500 square foot house, I can want 3,000 square foot roof. But well, they think they will make that number. But the reality of it is, it can be up to double in size, depending on how much extras you have that are not considered under there. So if you see the numbers on here, just to give some examples, what's on the market, pricing has dramatically changed over the last 2 years. knowing that some of the systems are too heavy, or they're not really going to transfer on the house. So this gives you the ability to have that same so 100 square feet. 100 square feet? Yeah, yeah. So anytime you hear 100 square feet, yes, so you just add two zeros. Well, no, 30 squares, 3,000 square foot. Well, this is a flat 3,000 square foot. They're still put into it. I mean, if you can get the actual play. This play is going to be terracotta, a little thinner, not. This 8-foot concrete is a little heavier. Not the same strength, but that's something the average person will know if they get up. And then you see that there's 3 profiles. You've got flat, medium, high profiles. So consider that a concrete, they all weigh about the same. Is there a better wind rating on any of them? Not really. It's all how they're attached. You get attached by screws or foam. Not waterproof, as you see in some of the pictures. Seams in them, which do not keep out of water. It's the underlayment that actually protects the leak. It's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But the underlayment starts giving out, and that's why doctors replace. Not because of anything wrong with the actual
I will let you guys see it. Once you get to this level of roof, it is another level of replacement. Starts at about $2,000 for, $30,000 for that same 3,000 square foot. We went from 14, 16, 19, 25, 30. So it's substantial jumps to get here. Essentially double what we always tell homeowners. Interesting. But the average house that has shingles on it cannot even consider a tile roof because of the leak factor. If someone's even considering it, most likely it cannot happen. The tile roof is 3 times the roof.
So you can probably go back to, you don't want to spend that much money, but it's probably very less.
Yes.
Don't they last longer than the sheriff that they supposedly last? 30 years.
Yeah.
I'm looking at Lindsey right now.
Historically, yes, they do last.
I mean, I sold the house recently that had a 1,000.
I've been on
22 years. I mean, they don't get insured.
So taking insurance out of it, the average shingle roof will replace is between 18 and 20 years old. Just because granular walls were starting to get too many leaks around penetration, so we can repair it here, repair it there. So let's just start replacing. Particular full replacement is on it. I do see shingle roofs that we make it to 22 or 24 years old. Not a whole lot get past that, but there are some. As far as tile roofs, I do see tile roofs 25, 30 years old. It's just the underlayment, like I said, will eventually give out. It just depends on the attachment style and what they use in the base. And it dries out. Most of it is asphalt based. So eventually it will dry out, it will crack and become brittle, and that's what causes it. The problem is, to do a repair, you have to remove all the tile, get to that, repair it, put it all back together, which is very labor intensive, and our repairs get very expensive quick. We charge $1 a square. That covers labor. We labor and removal because of the weight factor. So
How does that compare to a shingle?
we already factored in. So like if it's 30 square roof, went to a shingle, and growing up, we're bidding it. 600 square. So this roof, as long as it wasn't steep or too short, and any other factors to add price. So that's gonna. These are ballpark prices.
I love
Yeah.
that.
So you can be 500 plus 100 should be 6, so it'd be 18,000.
Well, a lot of that also depends on the wood too that you get. You do
Yeah.
when you pull up.
So there's so many factors.
You said 18,000 to remove it, or is that?
So that's all in.
Okay.
That's to remove this and put a standard.
So it's a couple $1,000.
So I mean, then you would save the homeowner anywhere from 10 to 12 grand in this case. Yeah. So I mean, that's something I'll leave you guys with. I was going to say it again, but you have our contact info. It takes us a couple hours to measurements. Go to Will Skills. If you've got someone semi-interested in contact the office, sketch report, give us the squares. We can give you guys a verbal within a couple hours sometime. And it's not guaranteed, but it gets within 10% generally. About 15, 16. No, we have a couple sketch services. As long as it's there's a visual on the house, we are service.
So there are aerials.
Yeah.
Got it. So if you got big overhanging trees
Yeah.
covering half your property,
Yeah.
you're gonna run into some issues. Getting quotes.
Next one is going to be metal roofs. Metal roofs are very, very popular. There's a lot of misinformation out there. Just because you put it on a metal roof doesn't mean it's going to last forever. If you go, you see there's 2 different systems. This one is very expensive and lasting very long. 20 to 30 years. No maintenance, no issue. Because as you can see, there are no fasteners It was all hidden under the seams, and that's what makes them last so long. There's nothing really wrong. As long as you keep them clean, they don't rust. Nothing that falls on them. They're pretty good. It's good. You go with the cheaper metal roof, is that for? It still creates a lot of problems. Every one of these screws just has a neoprene washer keeping the water out of your house. In 15 years, it's going to dry up that. You're going to have to come back and replace all your screws. So there is still maintenance involved, even though it is still considered a premium roof, where it would cost $20,000, $24,000 to put that type of system on. You're still going to have your maintenance issues. With those standing seam, like I said, it's going to be upwards of where the tile is, if not over. Depending on the finish you go with, if you go with straight, shiny mill finish, then those are cheaper. If you go with kind art paint, which is going to last 20 years, then you're going to be very expensive. Yeah. Well, in comparison of
To the top,
basics.
to the regular.
Well, in comparison to a shingle. Yeah, I mean, you're gonna go from 500 to, you can be up to 1,500.
A lot of that is in Florida, and I see that a lot.
There's a lot. There's coastlines. Coastal is very popular. When we were out in Sebring yesterday, that's a someone's house, couple of neighborhoods.
The worst plan city.
Oh, it's not good.
No.
I mean, so hail and metal don't get along very well. You don't have any, it's considered functional damage. But just like if you're each new cars out there, they'll so possibly, if they're dented, they are functional. The car works, everything's fine, you're not getting wet. Same thing after the roof, but you don't want to come back to see a nipple of roof every day. So it's cosmetic damage, but it is covered for replacement under most insurance plans. Unless you sign off on an aesthetics clause, which covers any cosmetic damage. So most of them will get replaced because unless you're going with a very thick gauge metal, they're still going to be damaged. As far as windows, they are one of the better ones to fully screw down system, but most manufacturers still won't put anything in writing over 130 miles an hour. Kind of like the cap, there's no puts it. It might go up and down. Camco was the first to make that die, something like 30, but you will see it on the next. Then the newest system that this is a picture of one we installed a couple weeks ago. That's one of our first ones we did in the area. Called stone coated steel. Now this will be the most right now. This is designed for those houses that cannot hold tile or that don't want the maintenance of the metal. You get the look of the shingle, you get the look of the slate, you get the metal tile roof, but these are actually 3-foot wide metal panels.
Is it stamped steel
Yes.
with a dimensional shape of tile?
And then they've got a granulated surface on top.
Wow.
So they get big. The one we did, about 14 inches square. They look really sharp. There's very limited maintenance. It gives the benefit of a metal roof where the actual, where I told you the tile is not a waterproof system, underlaying it is. When you're doing a metal roof, double water barrier because the metal is watertight, same with this system. And then you still have a full underlaying. If anything that happens to get past it, so give you that extra layer of protection. This would be for the flat roofs. There are two main systems you guys are going to see. There's a patio or partial flat. If it is smooth and white, most likely it's going to be a rubber roofing. If it is granulated like a shingle, then it's going to modify gold roofing. They run around the same price as the shingle roof. It just varies depending on complexity and installation. There's a lot of whole other mess factors when it comes to rose gold roof. This is one that put this slide in here because it saves me a bunch of phone calls. If you see a metal patio roof off the back, it looks aluminum, it's not wood structure, most likely it's going to be a foam for roof system. Patio style roof out there in this region. The average roofing contractor, there are a couple exceptions, do not mess with this. This falls under aluminum or patio enclosures or enclosures. So you could save a little bit of time on the roofers. There's not a whole lot you can do on these. You can put roofs on, tape seams, but that's very common call we get. We've got these. There's a roof, so. So, any questions about system? It gets us to repair versus replace. And there's a for the roofs. There's a very broad question. Average workmanship, ours is 3-year workmanship. We've been around for a very long time, 17 years. I still go back to old roofs. I just want to find out what's wrong. The most roofers is 2 to 5. That's the workmanship. If you go with an architectural shingle, first shingles from some of these manufacturers, like we offer those morning, where they will, after 2 years, they take over the warranty until the 10-year mark, so that really leaves about 10 years. Of course, you always find trends as to what is really covered. So we offer them. I don't know how to do all us. And if it's in your case, a salesman or something you're doing with a trying to buy or sell a house, 10 years makes them feel good. But if the first system, it does. It is a 10-year warranty back to the manufacturer. They do offer up to 25-year, but some of those are hard to get because of the shortage in material. You have to build the system with the products listed, and some of the products. So I would recommend just go with 10. Got issues after 10 years, it's usually not workmanship. Everything we've seen after 10 years, typically squirrels, wear and tear, storm, you name it. Workmanship is a nail out of place, shop nail, something like that, which is a simple fix anyway for most of us. We go out to see one of those, even if it's as far as products go, most shingles come with a lifetime warranty, but manufacturer's defect. And I'm just hoping once again, very more than fully covered, so like shingle, prorated, typical metal carries the work. It's every roof system attached to it, whether it's in-house, the workmanship, or the manufacturer. It's anywhere from 2 to lifetime. As a roofer, if you guys contact us because there's issues or some things that have come up in your inspection reports, you might not always like it. Say, hey, we got to replace the roof. It seems like it's something little, but there's a lot of factors we have to take into consideration. The age of the roof, brittleness, the surfacing, the granules loose, they're all coming out, blistering, pitting, and then Florida has a nice little rule for us that says 25%. The 25%. We just want to replace this side of the house, maybe just a section of this side. The way it breaks down is when I touch a facet of a roof, and I repair more than 25% of that little piece, I'm technically required to replace that whole piece. Now, if that whole piece equals 25% of the house, I have to replace the whole house. There used to be clauses that says you could go above 20%, 25% if the roof was too close, but they pulled that out. Let alone any roof not installed in the last year is not covered anyway because they changed code this year. To where underlay has to be a double layer, everywhere. So either 2 layers of felt, 2 layers of synthetic, or peel stick across the entire roof. So unless the roof is being replaced, what we do, little factors that come into play. Typically, what we look for, like I said, the most important one is the brittle. Lift the shingle up, we got to pull the nails out, get it out, put it back down. Shingle above it breaks, it's brittle. We just broke one shingle, replace one, and it's domino effect all the way through. This is from our brochure. 15 years is kind of where we fell off there, just because of very few use of fiber enough to have it something simple. Replace the mat. Pushing call clean stop a week, we can generally take care of that. And some people will go farther into it than we will, but just from our experience, when we start digging into those, we just chase things after that. And then if it's been a leak that's been in the wood long enough, the wood is damaged underneath it, you have to cut out a 4x4, 5x5 section, replace that wood, and I have to really section. Things to look for, we can get you a copy of this chart if it is, it's just something to go over. Look for cracks, tears, excessive shingle granules, usually around the gutters. Look at the downspouts and mounds of them. That's pretty obvious place to look. Try to make sure dark spots. Any questions? This talks about some storm restoration. If you see anything that happens storm related, that's something peculiar, that's something the homeowners should contact the next company for.
Insurance is typically more expensive too, like, right? From hurricanes and stuff. The deductibles are typically.
Oh, yeah. So one of the things is some people are afraid of deductibles. You have a normal deductible could be 1,000, and you have a 13 deductible, which is 5%. So just things to educate them on. Insurance claims, what we look for is this is what you guys can see. You see the little black spots, and these are where the shingle there at some point, and now it's not. Any inconsistencies, you see little rippling to the ground, and the shingle is lifted and not going down again. So, bruising for hail, not as obvious unless you're out. That's something like right now. You can see that from the ground. It's just like it sounds. It's a bruise. Shingle got hit by an object on this cut. So, going on to what we mentioned as far as payments, we are one of those companies that does do the
Loan commitment leading up to a closing date within like a week or two.
loan commitment letters, the escrows, things like that. So we do our traditional cash and credit card, of course, transfer means that they're going to cover it, which is very possible. Then we have traditional lending, which we offer in-house. We can go to outside lenders, of course, but also, anytime you're getting another loan, while trying to get a mortgage, is probably not the best idea. But if it is after the fact, there's a 12 months of 10 years of financing. Usually, construction loans are in the 8 to 10% range. So, if the mortgage is much cheaper. As far as how the aspect works with the closing, typically we'll try to get a small part of the front if possible. Worst case scenario, we will get 100% on closing, or within 60 days. If for some reason the deal falls through, you'll have to secure that. buyers pay for, sometimes the seller, sometimes they're splitting it. They'll loan, negotiate the price. Some of the nice advantages are the warranties all get put in the buyer's name, no transfer, all that. Not transfer. The buyer gets to begin the color selection process. House, patients, or even upgrading. They want to pay for the upgraded roof to go to a metal or from a precast architectural or designer. That's not something that we always pay for. It's the initial cost and then cover the upgraded cost. On those ones, we usually do the job after closing. Just because so it's, I'd say 60-40 have been before closing. We usually just place the roof anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks prior to closing. That way we can pass the inspections, get you guys your wood mitigation certificates, insurance on the house, and we do closing, check those in the escrow. It's simple for everybody. There are the alternatives where if you can get insurance on the property, you just want to replace it within 30 to 60 days. As well, so escrow, title company as well, will come out to move it to after closing. Place the roof, get it done. Based on that as well. Lots of options out there, other than buying each other's. Questions about any of that stuff?
No, that was very helpful. Thank you.
All right, Lindsay, you're up.
I get to be the bearer of bad news, I guess.
Be our Debbie Downer.
Yeah, right?
Tell us
Sometimes I
what
have
we
to.
can't do.
All right, so thank you, that's great information, I actually learned a few things, so, I'm excited to see what might happen with that new stone coated steel. I haven't seen that on the insurance side yet, but I think interesting. All right, so again, you were all here, but Lindsey O'Donnell with Florida Best Quote Insurance, we specialize in, or we cater to the real estate transaction, so we're here to help you guys get to the closing table, and of course, roofs are one of the bigger ticket items when it comes to trying to get insurance in place for closing. So we have on the slide a couple different types of shingle and tile and roofing systems. You know, you used to always hear that 30-year shingle, things like that. My roof should last 30 years. My tile roof should last 50 years. My metal roof should last this long. When I first got into this industry in 2010, we were closer to that scenario, but since then, things have changed drastically, and a lot of the carriers are changing their guidelines for what they will and will not accept on roofs. There are a lot of things that go on in the Florida insurance market that do not exist anywhere else in the country. A lot of, as far as lawsuits go, litigation, as far as requirements for replacing roofs, that 25% roof replacement, these kinds of things aren't necessarily found everywhere else in the country, but they're here because of our hurricane exposure. And it's just kind of resulted in some issues with the insurance carriers trying to stay in business and keep up with it all. So that's where I was talking about earlier with some of the changes we're trying to come up with to try and help keep the carriers in business with what's going on. So what that means in the short term is the carriers are just trying to stay afloat as far as keeping up with these claims, keeping up with everything that's going on. So they're all changing their guidelines for roofs at different levels. So for example, I've got one carrier who 2 years ago cut it back to they won't take any roof over 5 years old. Crazy, ridiculous. But that just basically means they don't want a house built more than 5 years ago. They're just trying to cut down their exposure. They're saying that's all they can take and keep their reinsurance in place, which their reinsurance is insurance they need to be able to cover major losses if they had a major storm come through. So if they can't get reinsurance, then they can't insure us. So we need to get insurance through them. They need to get insurance through someone else. It's kind of a trickle-down effect of just trying to keep everything going. So those carriers that say 5 years, your carriers that are a bit pickier, we just need to avoid them in most cases. We just need to not write coverage for them. So first things first, the biggest thing is just making sure your buyers are talking to insurance agents that have access to multiple companies. If you go through, USA is a great company, love them. they've only got one option. If they tell you no, that doesn't mean it's a hard no, it just means USA won't take it. Same for Allstate, State Farm, Geico, any of those carriers, they don't have a lot of options. That no just means that that carrier will not take it. And every carrier's guidelines are different. So an initial no, don't panic, give us a call, we can check through all of our carriers and see what we have. Now to give you kind of just some general examples of what the carriers are saying, or what I should be able to insure, depending on the quality of the roof, what the roof looks like, based on all those different types that we had up there. The first one is the 3-tab. The 3-tab is going to get you the shortest lifespan with insurance companies. That makes sense. It's the least expensive to put on, the lowest wind rating. So the insurance carriers for that, I might be able to insure a roof up to 10 to 15 years old. It's got to be in great condition. No granular loss, no lifting shingles, anything like that. We're in Florida, we do have windstorms, things like that, so you don't find many 15-year-old 3-tab shingle roofs that do not have damage on them. So that's where, can I technically insure it? Yes. Or am I going to find that perfect 3-tab shingle roof that has no damage? Probably not. So for those, we're looking more probably up to like 10 years before they need to look at getting replaced just due to damage and deterioration. Yep, so kind of you saw in the pictures, the 3-tab shingle roofs are gonna be the ones that all look like bricks laying flat. So there's no change in color, there's no different, no
Dimension.
yes, thank you. There's no changes there, it's all like flat bricks that lie there. And so you'll be able to see that they all look the same in uniform. With architectural or dimensional shingle, they're all different sizes and they're overlapping. And usually you see more color throughout that and whatnot. So I'll always go check Google or Street View, Google Street View if I don't have their photos. Sometimes you'll hear me say if I send a quote, this is based on, this roof being architectural shingle. I'll need some photos to confirm that if I can't tell. So yeah, and if my favorite is Google. Google's always great. So I'll often just Google 3-tab versus architectural shingles and it will give you pictures. Yeah, it'll show you that clearly. So 3-tab we're going to need to look at replacing more consistently. That's where we might have more trouble insuring those. Architectural is a little bit easier. We've got more carriers will go up to that 15 to 20 year lifespan. Citizens will take a shingle roof up till 25 years. The big caveat with Citizens is that we've got to have a perfectly clean 4-point before finding coverage. And the roof has to have at least 3 years remaining useful life. So again, once you get into that 20 to 25 year shingle, not many inspectors or roofers, if they go out there, are going to want to say that that roof's going to last longer than 3 years. Now, the one thing to keep in mind with insurance companies is in their world, 3 years remaining useful life means 1 year remaining useful life. So by renewal, we're going to have to get a new roof put on. So if you've got 3 years remaining and we're going through Citizens, that buyer is going to get a non-renewal before the year is up. So they will have to replace that roof. If the inspector puts on their 3 to 5 years, the insurance carrier is always going to look at that first number. So 3 to 5 years means 3 years. Again, we only have 1 year to get that roof replaced. And having at least 5 years is best, but again, once those years tick down, we're going to need replacement. So just have that conversation with buyers. Just because it says 3 years does not mean they have 3 years to replace their roof. The insurance companies are not going to want to get to the end of its useful life, because what happens at the end of its useful life? It leaks. Yes, it leaks, and then the insurance companies are having to pay for that. So they don't want to jump on a policy to cover a home knowing that they're going to have to replace the roof. They want that house to be in good condition. So they at least want a few years there. So 15 to 20 is our average with architectural shingle. Again, it all comes down to the look of the roof. So I get questions a lot of times saying, I've got a 20-year-old roof, can we insure it? What do you think we can do? And the response you're going to get back to me is potentially, yes, I should be able to. It's going to depend on the condition of the roof, how it looks, the photos, and then how much the buyer is willing to pay. So I said earlier in the team meeting, I can insure just about anything as long as it's not on fire. I can insure these houses. I can find ways. We might have to do a roof exclusion. We might have to do a roof at actual cash value. We might have to work around it a bit, but it could get pricey. So it could get more expensive to try and get those policies in place. And then I can always get you through closing, but I can't guarantee coverage will continue for any period of time because the carriers are going to go out and do their own inspection. If their inspector says something completely different than the buyer's inspector did, then we're gonna get it canceled and we'll have to replace. And at that point, we either have to see if replacing is possible or we have to look into additional carrier options. And then we do have carriers who will give the 30 to 60 days after to replace. So that's why it's really great to have a lot of good roofers that you work with, and Magnum said they can get out there really fast, because I know a lot of roofing companies have been kind of behind right now, and I've heard a lot, we can't get it done within that amount of time. So again, just, we can work around things. We might have to pay more for insurance up front, switch coverage over later. The other thing I just want to, sorry, I'm kind of jumping through here, but I don't want to forget, if you have a house that has a lot of issues, so let's say there's a lot that needs to be done. If that then becomes a situation where the buyer is going to be taking 3-4 months to do repairs and renovations before moving in, that's a completely different policy type, a renovation risk policy, and I can insure that a lot easier. So if you have someone looking at a house that has a lot of issues and the roof is a major issue, maybe talk to them about, okay, could you continue staying where you are for right now or find somewhere to stay, and we can kind of put some time into this. I can write you a renovation risk policy and get that coverage in place without needing inspection. So that can buy us a bit more time to get that done. All right, so there's a lot of different ways to work around it. And again, it just depends on how flexible the buyer is, how much the buyer can afford to pay for the insurance, and what the actual roof looks like. For tile roofs, again, when I first started in 2010, tile roofs, I could insure up to 50 years old, no problem. It's great, everything's wonderful. Now I've got some carriers who won't insure them over 15 years. So there's a lot of things there. One of the biggest is just some of these communities that have really particular, or a lot of guidelines over what kind of tile you can put on. If the insurance companies can't get that, it can cost a lot more, it can take a lot more time, things like that. And then also we've just got tile roofs that just are not lasting as long. And I actually did not know about that underlayment part, so that was very fascinating to learn, which might be a reason why we're now seeing roofs not last as long as we thought they should, or the insurance companies kind of picked up on the fact that those can start to leak a little bit sooner than we previously expected. So 15 to 30 years, I do have citizens that will go up to 50 still, as long as it's in good condition and as long as we have 3 years remaining. So again, everything kind of comes down to an individual basis for how the actual roof looks, the condition of it, pictures, what it looks like from the ground, all of those factors. Metal right now is probably our easiest to insure, which, kind of hearing some of the things you said, I'm sure that as we start to have more hail damage, which has not previously been as common in Florida as it is in somewhere like Texas, we are starting to see a lot more kind of widespread major hailstorms happening recently. Metal might start to have some changes in the next few years, but as of right now, our metal roofs, we are able to get a bit more life. So I would say probably about 30 years, 30 to 50 years again through the carriers for metal roofs. And that will again come down to the condition. If it's rusted, if there's any damage there, standing seam is our metal roof that's going to get the most amount of life out of it as far as the insurance companies looking at it. And then lastly, your flat roofs, we were those last. The flat roofs are not going to get as much time from insurance companies' perspective. Most carriers want those to be less than 10 years old. So those we need to replace a little bit more often. Again, citizens will still take it as long as it has a 3 years remaining useful life, but it does have to be in great condition. And once those do get up to that 10-year mark, that's where they start to fail quite a bit and have a lot more granular loss of issues there. So we can be kind of general with those numbers, those years, but if someone's not taking care of their roof at all, they might be on the lower end of these years. And if someone's taking great care of it and they don't have any trees over it, there's been no damage, then they might go a little bit more like that. So, any questions about roof features?
Saying that citizens don't want to say that because the policies aren't as strong as the other ones.
No, actually, so Citizens is our state-backed insurance. They are supposed to be our insurer of last resort. However, in the last couple of years, they've started taking on a majority of the policies in Florida again, which is a little scary. It's not supposed to be that way, but their policy form is meant to take the homes that can't get insurance elsewhere. So the idea there with having a little bit more leeway with what they'll take is just to try and help those homeowners who can't get insurance elsewhere. So they've always had a longer timeline for how long the roof they'll take. However, in the last, so up until probably up until about 2020, Citizens was kind of our go-to for older roofs as long as everything else was good. They didn't go out and do inspection. They didn't check on anything. As long as the inspection we sent in looked good, and everything looked great on the 4 point, we had at least 3 years remaining, they took it. They just recently started in the last year going out and doing inspections on a lot of homes, and we're getting a lot more pushback from those too. So even though they'll take those older roofs, they're starting to kind of crack down. Their policy form is still the same, they've still got all the coverage in there, they actually do not have any, roof services schedule endorsement, which that just basically means every year the roof gets older, the carrier will pay out less and less and less, which is something that a lot of the carriers are starting to try and push towards so that they can continue to insure roofs over 10 years old without having to pay to replace the whole thing. They don't have anything like that. They don't have actual cash value on their roof. They cover it fully. No caveats really there. But like I said, they are getting a bit pickier, so it's a little bit trickier. You got a 25-year-old shingle roof that's fantastic, and a roofer inspector will give you 5 years. All right, we'll see. But again, that's getting harder as well to get the inspectors to get that time. All right. So we're talking about insurance policy. The one other thing I just want to mention real quick is as far as filing an insurance claim on that roof. An excessive amount of insurance claims on roofs is obviously why we're in this situation where it's getting trickier. Like I said, there's been a lot of loopholes. There was recently a lot of changes to legislation allowing attorneys to make a lot of money off of filing claims against insurance companies. Those are attorney fee multipliers. So they can charge 3 times their hourly rate if they sue an insurance company, which just means it's a very lucrative business right now. So it's become very easy to get an attorney to take on a case against an insurance company. That has made the insurance carriers very wary of anyone who does have to sue an insurance company. They're very wary of anyone doing it. I mean, we've got a situation where they've got a claim for a $20,000 roof. The attorney gets involved, and suddenly they're paying out $700,000 to the attorney and only $20,000 to the homeowner. So there's a big discrepancy there. We can't really rate for a $700,000 payout when the house is only worth $200,000. So that's where we are. What that means is, if you have a seller and that roof is older and we're looking at it and seeing that there's damage that should be covered by insurance, keep in mind that if they do file that claim, if there's an open claim for the buyer, that's going to show up on the buyer's report when the buyer goes to get their own insurance. It's going to show if there's an open claim, they will not be able to get insurance on the house. If they have to go to an attorney and sue the carrier, that's going to show that there's a lawsuit against the carrier, and that's going to stay open for a very long period of time. That's going to impact the buyer's ability to get insurance as well. So if you have a situation where someone wants to do that, first you have to know that the seller can get that claim filed and that roof replaced before closing and the claim completely closed. Or you need to talk about possibly extending things, working it out that way. Or in some situations where it's likely that we might have to bring an attorney into it, it honestly is probably just better for the buyer to find or the seller to find a way to replace the roof outside of going to the insurance company if selling is something that they want to do at that time. Because it just really kind of complicates the matter. Buyers get very frustrated when they find out they can't get insurance because of something a seller did. So if you ever have that situation, you have any questions, just give me a call. We can kind of talk through it, talk through all the pros and cons. Clearly, we have insurance for a reason, so a seller is going to want to be able to use it. But at the same time, if they want to sell, we just want to make sure that we're looking at all sides of that. And then lastly, I just want to touch on the H06 versus H03 thing with roofs. So if it's a straight condo, so you're going to see a straight condo anytime that it is box on box. So if you've got more than one floor and there's different units on top of each other, that's a condo association. In the state of Florida, there is statute that if you have a condo association, then the condo association has to insure the exterior of the building. And there's guidelines for what kind of coverage they have to provide. So anytime you see that multiple stories, you know for sure association insures the exterior for hazard insurance and flood. When you have, if you see the association says the word condo, whatever it is, condo association. If they're filing as a condo association, they legally have to carry that insurance on the exterior of the home. So that's kind of one of our first big groups. Now, where it gets a little confusing is with your townhomes and villas and your homeowners associations. How that works is there's no Florida statute that says who has to cover and where it has to be covered. So it all comes down to the association's bylaws and what they determine at the time of inception or through their changes that they've made to their bylaws and what they want to do as an association. They either have the option to choose to insure the exterior or not to. What you'll see a lot is that the association will almost always maintain the exterior. They'll paint, they'll fix siding, They'll replace the roof every 15 to 20 years when it needs replacing. So they'll have that money set aside from assessments to do it, but they will not necessarily insure the exterior for if there's a wind, if there's a hurricane, if there's fire damage, if something falls on the roof, that falls on the homeowner. So if you come across a townhome situation with the homeowners association involved, it's best to try and talk to the property manager or the insurance company for the association to see what kind of policy they have in place, or to take a look at the bylaws to see if the bylaws say for coverage as to whether the homeowner is responsible for insuring the exterior or the association is going to insure the exterior.
Good information.
Sure.
That was awesome. Always learn so much when you come. Thank you.
Yes.
This is also mortgage related.
Okay.
So obviously, right now, it's less likely that the seller is fixing anything, and that we're holding something back in escrow, or that the buyer has to take care of it, in which case we probably need more of the buyer exclusions. But I do, so two questions on that regarding FHA and VA. My first question has to do with condos. If the condo association is maintaining and responsible for a roof, but it is 20 years old, and it is on a connected product, is VA or FHA, is that still going to be a problem even if they, through the homeowners association, will be responsible for replacing the roof and maintaining insurance?
You're talking about the new condo questions and stuff like that?
Or just VA and FHA in general, event closing with anything planned? So specifically one side, not single family, on the condo side. You know, but if a roof's, usually FHA or VA has an issue with it being, let's say it's running a roof. But if it's a condo product and the HOA is responsible for replacing and maintaining, and they haven't done it yet, yes, have an FHA or VA loan still close on.
I haven't run into anything specifically like that where, you know, if there are that kind of tolerances with like the life expectancy inside the associations, and obviously if you, that's pretty much always the fall. Association control. Roof replacements. I'd say what you're gonna get flagged on is gonna be the fact that government products now, we're not really utilizing like the old HUD lists and stuff for FHA, we're doing site approvals. So like on an FHA condo, for instance, where we don't go on the websites anymore to look up if they're approved or not approved. We're handling them just like we are conventional loans now, where they go through a whole condo questionnaire and everything like that. More than likely, if there's an issue with the property's condition or something like that, I don't know if it show up in the budget or, yeah, or, yeah,
And then okay, so really just.
yeah.
So
I
now-
haven't really seen one of those before.
On the single family, it's VA or FHA with an older age group, and insurance can do it by giving us some kind of exclusion, and then the buyer is willing to replace the roof immediately upon move-in. Will that be sufficient for VA or FHA?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's,
If they do
as
that?
long as the appraisal doesn't say it's subject to a roof replacement,
No, that's what I'm asking. If it says that
you have to have it done.
before you.
Or we do an escrow pullback. So they're on both ways, and obviously in this market, it's probably gonna be more so buyers these days, so. But yeah, I mean, we would have to do an escrow pullback, and you could still close with the contingency of that roof replacement going on within a certain number of days.
They don't have to be an what if the person is gonna finance it, like the buyer is gonna pay for it. Would they be allowed to finance it and have it done for 30 years, 50 years?
As
Because there
far
wouldn't be
as,
any escrow for that.
so you were saying if the buyer was financing, could they do that? I mean, they're gonna be
But
taking
that would
on,
show
they're gonna
them
be
the
taking
debt.
on the risk prior to closing, so we would obviously need to reapply that as a credit supplement into their financing to make sure that from a liabilities perspective, their debt to income ratio and everything like that still pans out, but, again, that's also like that's where it gets a little tricky as well, where you're having buyers do repairs on properties before they take ownership interest
Well,
in
no,
that
I'm
property.
saying they wouldn't really do it until after they close, but
Still financing it.
they would have, yeah, they would have a guarantee that they were gonna have it done, if they had a contract on it.
I don't think that would work, because the lender is only going to allow an escrow holdback, and if it's gonna be done post-closing, if it's a subject to repair item, you're gonna pretty much be required to do an escrow holdback. I don't think that's gonna be or possibility per se, because they're gonna require escrow to go into title for that.
Buyer's gonna have to have money on the seller.
Exactly. Yeah. So in that situation where you have a subject to item, the easiest thing to do is, like I said, working with companies where they can do, they can take it out of the proceeds of the real estate that's getting sold, put it on ahead of time. You're gonna have to obviously wait until you're far enough into a transaction where you have a loan commitment with almost no major items conditions remaining, to understand with both parties, and then, potentially a smaller deposit going over just to set, secure the roofing need, replacement, everything like that. But those are gonna be your two big items. Otherwise, the financing, you're also getting financing, adding the financing, that you would basically be doing the replacement, charging your buyers upfront on it before they have home ownership interest rights on the property. That's incredibly risky. I talk to my buyers all the time, like, go fixing a property, that you don't own yet. I mean, if it doesn't close, that's what are you gonna do? But that's the reason it's not right now. And Mary Beth, do you have anything with your experience on that? I mean, this previous lender information and knowledge on roofing, way back in the
I mean,
day.
if it doesn't come up on the appraisal as an item that has to be fixed, then the buyer can do it post-closing.
Yeah.
They get, I mean, usually they'll get insurance and then, but what I've seen lately is they'll get insurance and then they have 60 days to replace the insurance.
Time frame before it expires.
Right,
Because they usually do a post inspection in those instances where you can get the roof replaced before they send the inspector out.
yeah, yeah, I've seen it where they get 60 days to replace it post-closing, and then, I mean, I had a client that did that recently, and they replaced it within 2 weeks after closing.
Yeah, the biggest thing with that is just to keep in mind, if we are going to try and if we're getting approval from the carrier to get it replaced after closing, then we need everything else on the 4 points to be clear. If the 4 points required.
Right.
So we can't have electrical issues and plumbing issues. So that's where when you go back to the seller, you can say, listen, my buyer is going to replace this roof and pay for it. However, I need you to fix the double taps. I need you to fix this leaking faucet before we can go through, and then we can get the approval. And then the other option is, like Michael mentioned, if we have a carrier who's not going to require me to submit the inspection, but they're going to go out there 2 to 3 weeks after closing and do their own inspection, then we know we need the roof replaced before they get out there. So that's where it's imperative to work with the roofer. We can definitely get it done in time, if we're going that route. Otherwise, the carrier will do the inspection, see the old roof, said it's canceled. If we get pushed up further, then it gets trickier, so.
Come back to financing again, it's really going to work depending on what is identified on the appraisal. If there's a repair called for on the appraisal, you're going to be limited as far as your options on how to approach and handle repairs in the roof ahead of time prior to, making those necessary repairs. If it's not identified, it obviously increases the amount of flexibility that you're going to have. So after closings and stuff like that, so. Got any other questions? If not, I think we're done. And again, I can't thank Lindsey O'Donnell, Edward, for coming in.
Thank
They did a lot
you.
more calls and requests for roof replacements after this storm.
But as far as the last thing, as far as timing goes, Shingle roofs can happen as quick as two. Plan on 46. If it's tiled. Yeah.
But from what they said,
Yeah. Yeah. So, don't wait.
we're taking 6 weeks to put a roof on that.
Oh,
Typical, typical roof one day.
Yeah.
Alice County, always requires inspection. Typical shingle roof, sometimes two.
And is it still also different on some if you're doing tile roofs that people always typically should provide coverage on it just because the tiles constantly coming down as far as body replacements?
So tile is, any tile over about 12 years old is like this. That's why a lot of it's for replacement. It matches the usually it's on the tile about 10 years old. That's what's taking the longest right now. The quickest I can get any tile is about 12 weeks. But the average flat tile is pushing 20 weeks.
One thing that reminds me
Doors.
of with this, whether you go with, us or any other, roofer, make sure they're licensed and served. You don't want to get into it.
And again, I'll go ahead and I'll patch everyone's contact details that attended the class into Edward's contact details, if he gets some cards and different things like that. Don't already know Lindsey,